Hi again then guys, and welcome to, of course, the very first car review from 1.45 in Gran Turismo Sport, and what better place to start than with what you could make a pretty strong argument is the most significant new car of the four, because of course two of them are returning faces and two of them are new, this and the Dodge. We'll get to the Dodge in due time, but as far as this one goes, I would say that this one is probably, for me, the standout in terms of significance from the pack. I wasn't expecting it, I would have never predicted it, especially because they already have the Camaro in the game, so adding variants of cars doesn't tend to happen all that often in GT Sport, unless it's a Japanese car, you know, like different skylines. But it's Gran Turismo, so what do you expect? Now, as far as this one goes, the fact that we already have the Camaro is an interesting conundrum, because it automatically makes you ask, is this necessary? But unlike the difference between the Subaru Impreza that was added recently and the 22B that we already had, the differences here are much more clear-cut. This is a very different car, and I'm not just talking about spec, even the way it handles is totally different. The Camaro that was already in the game feels like what it is, a powerful, good, affordable muscle car. Great. This does not feel like that. This feels like a large GT, something more akin, for instance, to a Bentley Continental GT or a Nissan GTR. And if you are producing a muscle car that can run with those, that's a good sign. Now, the price tag on this one is still very good. In fact, it's one of the best things about American performance cars as far as I'm concerned. The bang for buck value is fantastic. They won't necessarily always be the lightest or the fastest through corners, but if you're looking for sheer power and also engines that are incredibly tunable, then America's the way to go. And Japan offers a very similar level of value for money as well, but they tend to offer it in lightweight track-focused packages, whereas America, as I said, tends to be bigger, more comfortable, more powerful, and certainly very torquey. Now, speaking of those torque figures, this has a whole lot of it. In fact, the power is already supercar level, and the torque is actually beyond a lot of supercars in the game. 650 horsepower, 640 pound-feet of torque. Now, for some strange reason, they opt not to tell us the engine capacity. It's always kind of weird when Gran Turismo does that. And as far as the weight on this one, it is heavy, but not necessarily as heavy as you might expect. 1,732 kilos, more than some GTRs, but less than a Veyron, a whole lot less than a Bentley Continental GT, less than a Tesla. So across the board, it actually sits pretty well for a car of its size. And as I said, the pricing is still very good. Now, the other Camaro is what, like 35 grand, I believe, at least in the UK version of the game. This one is just under 80,000, so it still undercuts Porsche GT3s, Nissan GTRs by tens, if not sometimes hundreds of thousands of credits. And although you can earn money very easily, you know, you can buy a GT3 Porsche after one Blue Moon Bay race, but still, value for money is nice to know. It's good to get a lot from a lower price, and this definitely offers that. Now, how does it compare, I would say most interestingly, to the Hellcat? Because although arguably a better rival, and that is the Challenger Hellcat, is not in the game, the Charger at least is, and it's a similar initial package. It's a muscle car to some degree with a whole lot of power for a good price that is, just like this one, running in the same kind of end classes that a lot of supercars can, and that can cause a lot of problems. However, unlike the Charger, this is actually a completely different approach to a high-performance variant. And what I mean by that is that pretty much all of the Hellcat models, be it the Challenger, the Charger, whatever, even the Demons, all that kind of stuff, they all tend to be focused more on the straight line aspect, which is great. It's kind of America's thing. This, though, is very clearly not. It has power, and it has torque, but it's not really aiming for that. This really is, I would say, America's answer to stuff like a GTR Nismo or a Porsche GT3. And although it won't necessarily beat those 9 times out of 10, the fact that it can even be compared to them is great news for something like a muscle car, even for an American car in general to be on the same playing field as something like a GTR. That's impressive, especially when it's so much cheaper. It's got a sound which Japanese cars just don't have, you know, that V8 rumble. I like the way this thing looks, I like the way it sounds. The handling is actually the most impressive thing about it, because the Camaro is a large car, maybe not by American standards, but by everywhere else in the world standards, it's big, especially for a two-door vehicle. Now the weight is high, but it's not ridiculously high, and the way that it carries itself through corners is very impressive. Like I said, the fact that you can even compare it to stuff like SLS AMGs, GTR Nismos, etc., that is impressive straight out of the gate. Now you can drop the weight, of course, but it's still over 1400 kilos, and the power is fantastic. No surprises there. 1007 horsepower fully tuned. It is actually in the top 10 most powerful cars in the game when it is fully tuned, and the torque of course is massive as well. So it's not that it lacks straight line speed by any means, it's just not so much geared towards that. It's kind of like the Viper ACR of the Camaro world. It's got the big wing, much more of a track focus to it, and it shows. Unlike a lot of performance cars that are more visual, when America makes a track focused version of a car, it tends to be very good. Even these two examples that I just mentioned go to show that. This and the Viper ACR, they're both brilliant. Now as far as whether this car should be purchased in the game, and if so what can you use it for, well of course it's 80 grand, so why wouldn't you buy it? It's a significant new car. Most people I think have probably purchased it by this point, so I don't really need to sell you on that. But what is a more interesting question is when should you use it? Because having a huge amount of power is all well and good, but because the class system of course is so different in this game to the last game, it's a totally different playing field. If this car were in GT6 under the performance point system, it would make a lot more sense because it would be much more accurately taken into account under stuff like weight and size as well, not just pure power, whereas this is literally in the same category as stuff like an SLR McLaren. That's not fair. And regardless of the power and weight, it's just not the same caliber of vehicle. So can you use this to race, and can you use it to win? Now of course I'm racing the AI here on professional difficulty, and of course it beats them because it's AI. Against real people, that's when you need to choose your battles wisely, because is it a great car? Absolutely. Fully tuned, it will break 230 miles an hour without even, well, breaking a sweat. Through corners, it's good, but it's good in a relative way. It's good for a 1700 kilo Camaro that's well over 6 feet wide. Against a GT3 RS, or a Viper even, well then you might struggle, because they're in the same kind of classes when you tune them up, and a Porsche is already OP in N4 or N500, so imagine what it's like in N700 or N600, which if I recall is unfortunately the lowest that you can get this car to. Even if you detune it, I don't think you can quite get it into N500. Now the interesting switch to that is that because we already have the Camaro SS in the game, that one can kind of be used to cover the lower classes, but it's not quite a one-to-one thing. You know, that car is not this through corners, that's for sure, but at least if you want to show your love for the Camaro, you've got two options there to pretty much cover everything between N300 all the way up to N1000 in the case of this one, and both cars together will cost you like 100 grand, so the value for money is fantastic. But in terms of this one's use, as I was mentioning, you can definitely use it to win races, but be very careful when you choose to. It has the potential to absolutely beat GTRs, and the fact that you can even say that is impressive. However, if you get a good driver in a GTR, well then you might struggle. And if you get a supercar up against this thing, of course you're going to struggle. So unfortunately the car is kind of, not doomed, but definitely hindered by the N-Class rating system. The fact that we can't do anything about that means that you've either got to work with it or go for something else, but if you do choose to drive this car, it is very rewarding. I like everything about it, apart from the fact that maybe you can't tune it a little bit lower, but apart from that, across the board it's great. The look, the sound, the handling, the detail, the quality of the finish with the graphics, I like it. Across the board, it's a great car. So overall, that's it for my thoughts. Of course, we'll be discussing the others too in the coming days on the channel, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.